Today we start the video a little bit differently than we might normally. I'm going to show you guys two different clips here, and I want you guys to just kind of take note of any differences you see, especially in terms of Candace's damage and Yoimiya's damage. These are two different Candace builds, so I want you guys to just take note of the differences here. And if you were paying attention in those clips, you might have noticed in one clip, Candace is dealing significantly more damage, and in the other clip, Yoimiya is dealing a little bit more damage. And the key difference here is that they're two different Candace builds, and one is full in on HP percentage on Candace, and the other one is essentially just a main DPS built Candace. And the differences in Yoimiya's damage are not staggering, but the differences in Candace's damage is substantially different. Hi there, Blossums here, and today we're going to be going over our Candace build guide and going over how I kind of think HP percentage is a trap on her, and I wanted to start off with that clip as kind of a reference point, because initially when I went to go build my Candace, I went for the full HP percentage, and then I slowly started to realize that it really wasn't worth it, especially when I started testing the differences between building her the way that I have her in one of the clips versus a full HP build, and I wanted to make sure to go ahead and get that out there. So today we're covering her weapons, her artifacts, her kit, how it all works, in some different teams to put her in, especially a freeze team that I've been particularly enjoying, as it is a ton of fun, and just how viable she is moving forward, as I think she's pretty good now, but even better in the future. So we got plenty to talk about. Before we do though, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, especially if you enjoy this kind of content. It helps me out a ton, and I really appreciate it. But let's talk about Candace's kit. First up, what does Candace do? What does she provide for a team? Well, Candace's role on teams is essentially to be some sort of sub DPS hydro infusion bestower who also buffs your elemental normal attack damage specifically, and she does this with her elemental burst. And the way her elemental burst works is you cast it, you deal some AoE hydro damage, and then you bestow the active character the Prayer of the Crimson Crown effect. And the way this works is that it increases your elemental damage for your normal attacks. It doesn't matter what element it is, you get a damage increase for those normal attacks. But when a character swaps or takes the field, you're also going to deal an instance of AoE hydro damage, and there's a maximum to how many times that can happen, 3 times. And then on top of that, you also bestow hydro infusion to sword, claymore, and polearm wielding characters, so it is going to exclude catalyst and your bow characters. And this might seem a little annoying, but I think it's more of a boon, and in fact most characters just ignore the hydro infusion if they infuse themselves with an element in one way or another. At least most of the time, Kaching does not override this infusion, so keep that in mind. It's just kind of case by case there, but that is essentially one of the biggest parts of her kit, and you're going to be buffing your allies with that elemental burst, as well as providing some off-field hydro AoE damage that scales off your max HP. And then on top of that, your elemental damage from your normal attacks is going to be increased by her passive, to where that character gains an additional 0.5% increased damage to opponents for every 1,000 points of Candace's max HP. So you get the 20% there, and then you get a percentage based off of her max HP based off of this passive. But that's not all to her kit. However, that is the main kind of focal point to her kit and what she provides to a team. But she does also have some other interesting things, namely her E skill that acts essentially the same way as Yunjin's elemental skill does. You can tap it to deal some hydro damage immediately, or you can hold it to block some damage and then deal an increased amount of damage with the charged up version. And both of these also scale off your max HP, and the shield absorption for the blocking version does scale off your max HP. They have the differing cooldowns there. So this is pretty cool. You can block stuff real nicely, or you can just apply some hydro. They do have slightly different particle generation, which makes sense considering they have different cooldowns, so keep that in mind as well. But this doesn't contribute to her supportive capabilities. This is simply just to protect yourself or generate some particles for her. Now, we'll also talk about her normal attacks, and this is mostly because she has some interesting unique factors to her normal attacks. One of the most glaring ones is the fact that her multipliers on her normal attacks are actually pretty high for a polearm user. When you compare these to other polearm users, these are actually pretty high modifiers. So if you really enjoy making your characters that aren't exactly geared for main DPS into main DPS, then she's going to be an excellent character to do so for, since her modifiers are so high. And then on top of that, This normal attack sequence has a shield bash on the second hit, which is particularly interesting because this shield bash counts as a heavy hit. And what that means is that the shield bash not only is capable of shattering opponents, but it is also capable of dealing more damage to constructs or ores and whatnot in the open world. And I just felt that was noteworthy because it's kind of random, but still interesting and neat whenever you learn that little fact. And as for other passive that we kind of skipped over, it just allows it to where whenever you get hit by an attack, the whole duration of her E skill is charged instantly. So if you just time it correctly, you can get the whole damage immediately, which is pretty nice. Essentially working exactly the same as Yunjin's, where it's, you know, also essentially a counter. All right, now for the important part, we'll discuss Candace's artifacts, and we'll begin with her artifact sets. And I think the best overall artifact set bonuses for your Candace build is going to be Emblem of Severed Fate and Tenacity of Millith, a mix of the two-piece bonuses there, to get that extra HP and the extra energy recharge that'll bump up your general effectiveness as well as your consistency. But those aren't your only options, and in some cases I think there are better options. Something like the Noblesse Oblige especially is fantastic on Candace, but remember that this is buffing attack percentage, and if you're using Candace, she's an HP percent scaling character. And if you're using the Hydro Resonance bonus, which you're likely going to want to do to not only buff her effectiveness, but there are a lot of HP scaling Hydro characters, well, then this might become less valuable if that attack percent isn't benefiting Candace and the other Hydro unit for that team in particular. This could be a bad option at that point. But if Candace is the only HP scaling character, or maybe she's not the only HP scaling character and everybody else just benefits from the attack percent anyway, then this is an excellent option, and I think a really good one on Candace. Likewise with something like the Emblem of Severed Fate, this isn't a bad option at all, especially if you're building her the way we are, allowing her elemental burst to deal that extra damage. But this isn't nearly as valuable until you get her Constellation 6, because her Constellation 6 does give her additional Hydro damage that occurs whenever you do elemental normal attacks there that scale off of her max HP as well. So this is when the 4-piece of Emblem of Severed Fate becomes significantly more valuable on her as an artifact set, but until you get that C6, it's really not that great. And that's why we kind of land on the 2-piece Emblem of Severed Fate and the 2-piece Tenacity in the Millith, because this just helps her out in both categories, and this is generally going to be good regardless of what you're doing. Whether everybody does benefit from attack percent or not, this is just going to be a good set on her. It's not your only option, however. You could do something like the 2-piece Gilded Dreams if you really want to get that EM up for whatever reason, or if you just want to do 2-piece Noblesse Oblige or 2-piece of the Hydro set, the Heart of Depth, that is fine too. And if you're trying to build her as a main DPS, the 4-piece Heart of Depth is really good as well. Help you out with those normal attack modifiers that we mentioned out before. So you do have plenty of options. However, I do still think that initial split set that I showed you is going to be the best one. Now let's discuss the elephant in the room, the main stats. This is where things get important, because when most people go to build their Candace, they want her to be as effective of a support that she could be, and that usually drives them to just go full HP percent on Candace. However, I'm here to tell you and show you that that's really not the move to go. And in fact, what I think the optimal way to set up your Candace is going to be HP percent on your Sands, and then Hydro damage bonus on your Goblet, and then crit rate or crit damage for your Circlet. Now, there are a myriad of different ways to mix up these main sets that we'll talk about in just a second, but this is kind of what I landed on, and it is also going to heavily depend on your weapon, which we'll discuss in tandem here in just a moment. But the full HP percent compared to this setup really isn't that different on how much damage it's actually giving you. I'll even show some additional clips here of two things side by side, and you'll notice the damage difference really isn't that crazy. It's just not as much as you'd think it is. That passive really isn't doing that much, and I think it's far better to focus on Candace's personal damage at that point, especially as you get her constellations down the road, where one of the constellations not only gives you additional HP percentage anyway, but then the other constellation, the C6, gives you that additional elemental burst damage factor that we talked about before, and I think is just far more valuable to build her in that damage oriented sense. But I did mention that these main stats get to even change even if you're trying to build her for that personal damage. HP percent on the sands might not be the way to go for you because maybe you just don't have a certain weapon. And we'll talk about weapons here in a second. Spoiler alert for the weapon section, we'll still go over some of the other ones, but I'm using the catch here because it gives plenty of energy recharge, increases that elemental burst damage, and increases the burst critical rate. Helps her out a ton in different ways, but if you don't have this, or if you're using it on another character, then something like the Black Tassel is going to be a really good option as the only HP percent substat spear in the game currently, as that'll fill that void, but then you're lacking that energy recharge that I'm getting from something like the catch. So then when you go back to your artifacts here, you might want to swap your sands for an energy recharge sands, and then that'll help balance out the differences there. It is really going to be dependent on what artifacts you have and what weapons you have and how you're utilizing them overall. But you are going to want a good balance of having a good HP percent substat like a sands or on your weapon there, and then hydro damage bonus or crit rate or crit damage. And the hydro damage bonus isn't entirely necessary if you really need to and you just don't have like a Black Tassel for whatever reason, or you don't want to use it on her and you want to use something else, then you could have HP percent on the goblet here, energy recharge on the sands, and then whatever weapon you were planning to use. So mix and match how you like. The main focal point of making Candace deal damage is getting up that crit rate and crit damage and allowing her to deal that damage, but hydro damage is still valuable, don't get me wrong, but not entirely necessary if you just don't have the right artifacts. Now, I know that was a little complicated way to go about the main stats, but I also want to put it into perspective for you here. In the way that I have my Candace set up with the HP percent, the hydro damage, and the crit damage here, this puts her at 27k HP with the hydro resonance, keep in mind, so I am getting a little boost there just to, you know, not try to lie to you or anything, but we're getting 27k HP there when we have her set up like this. Now, when we set her up with full HP percent main stats, and we even add the Black Tassel on top of it just to commit fully to the HP percent, this puts her at 40k HP, which is a lot more HP, but as I had mentioned before, it's really not giving you that much in return. And that's the staggering difference between the HP there. I think it's a little bit different in some of the clips that I had because I was messing around with all sorts of different stuff and different artifact sets, but the concept remains the same and the HP values are pretty much the same massive difference between going full HP and not going full HP. And that's what I really wanted to point out. All right, we're through probably the most complicated portion of the video, talking about the main sets and how just full HP percent isn't worth it in my opinion. You can still go for it if you really want to lean into your main DPS, but I think building her to deal that damage is far more valuable. But what about the substats? Of course, that is equally important. Well, you're going to want crit rate and crit damage, of course, especially since we're trying to make her deal damage in this kind of build, but energy recharge is extremely valuable as well, especially if you're not using an energy recharge weapon. Getting it in the substats is very good. If you could get a really good sands with like 20% ER like this one here that I have, that would be phenomenal for your Candace, because then you could maybe circumvent having an energy recharge main stat like we discussed earlier and give yourself even more HP while still building into the damage aspect. So if you can get really good energy recharge substats, that's phenomenal, congrats. But other than that, crit rate and crit damage are extremely valuable, and if you can get HP percent on any of your other artifact substats, then that's going to be phenomenal as well, especially since we don't have the HP main stats as much anymore. You'll be able to find HP substats on those artifacts now, which is really good. Energy recharge isn't wasted entirely, especially since the way Candace works, she's generally the one proccing a reaction, but for the most part, you don't really need to seek it out or anything. Crit rate, crit damage, energy recharge, and HP percent are going to be your top priorities for those substats. All right, moving back to weapons, we went over this a little bit, and I think one of your best 4-star options is easily going to be the catch, or the extra elemental burst damage, the energy recharge, and a little bit of crit rate on the elemental burst. Very nice, allows you to be a little bit more greedy with your crit damage, and overall this is my top pick for her in the 4-star category. But the Black Tassel is a phenomenal weapon on her as well. It also goes just so perfectly in terms of aesthetic, while giving you plenty of HP percent on the substat there. pretty nice overall. But what about other 4-stars? Well, other 4-stars, the Favonius Lance is probably my next best pick, just because it gives you a little bit of ER and generates some energy for the team. I don't think it's that bad or anything, but for the most part, there's nothing that really resonates with her kit or what she's trying to do. Crit rate and crit damage options are fine, but not really all that necessary. If maybe you just need it and you don't have good crit rate or crit damage substats, then go for it. But the passives here aren't really going to be doing anything for you. And the same kind of goes for a lot of the 5-stars. The only real 5-star that I would recommend for Candace is probably Staff of Homa, just because, you know, you get the extra HP percent anyway there, and you're getting tons of crit damage. The passive is actually pretty decent overall, so that's probably the best 5-star option for her. And then maybe some of the energy recharge options aren't too bad either. But realistically, she just doesn't have a lot of weapons that feel tailor-made for her or really good on her, at least yet. I think that'll change moving forward, but we'll have to see. Also wanted to briefly mention this just to kind of get your brain thinking. For the artifact set bonuses, she doesn't have anything tailor-made to her, and this seems to be a recurring theme with some of the HP scaling characters that we've been getting lately. Dori, Nilou, and her all scale with HP, but nothing really seems to work well for how their kits operate, and I really wouldn't be surprised if we get an HP percent artifact set coming up very soon, and maybe 3.3 or so will be due for some new artifact sets. And if one of those is HP scaling and works for their kits, I really wouldn't be surprised. So I wouldn't go too hard on farming for specific set bonuses for characters like Candace, Nilou, or even Dori, as I could easily see them getting a set that fits them more appropriately in the future. All right, and I also briefly wanted to go over the constellations, as I do think her constellations are really good, and 4-star constellations are much easier to come by. The C1 I feel is nearly necessary just because it increases the duration there of your elemental burst, which makes it much better because it makes it only have a 3-second cooldown time rather than a 6-second one, which feels substantially better, especially trying to buff your other character's normal attack elemental damage there. But then beyond that, the C2 gives her additional HP percentage whenever you do her E skill, which is incredible. And then the Constellation 4 is a little weird just because you can do the max damage just by tapping it, which is kind of nice. It just allows you to increase your damage essentially without having to wait. But it kind of feels like a wasted constellation. And then the C6 that we mentioned before is, of course, really strong, allowing you to get that additional AoE hydro damage whenever you're dealing those elemental damage normal attacks, and it gives her a whole new utility and increases the viability of different artifact sets like we mentioned before. Nothing too broken or anything, but all of them are pretty solid, and they're not too bad to get since she's a 4-star. You'll end up getting them in the future, I'm sure. All right, we'll move on to some of the kind of team pairings for different characters she pairs well with, as well as just general team composition stuff. And of course, the normal elemental damage attack characters are going to be phenomenal with her because that's what she buffs. Characters like Yoimiya, Ayato, Tartaglia are all going to be phenomenal for her, especially a character like Ayato who also scales with HP, and getting the additional HP percent from the Hydro Resonance is really nice. It'll complement both of them. But then there are still other characters. There are plenty of other elemental normal attack characters. If you have the cursed C6 Bennett or something, that's great. Kaching benefits a little bit from that when you're doing her normals. Diluc even benefits a little bit when you're doing his normals, whenever you're just doing the normal attacks in between your E-skill activations to get the vaporizes. You can make his normal attacks hydro and help out with that. So that's another aspect to it. Characters like Yunjin will help, of course, complement the buff that Candace is giving because she's another normal attack buffer. So just keep those things in mind. There are plenty of ways to mix and match with your Candace to accent your characters, but I do want to make you weary of some of the traps that people will fall into, namely the common ones like Raiden Shogun not being a good character for Candace because her damage counts as elemental burst damage. Another character like Nilou also being a trap because when you convert her normal attacks into the hydro damage, they count as elemental skill damage, not normal attack damage. So Candace will not buff Nilou's damage while she's doing that normal attack hydro damage whenever you convert her normal attacks to hydro with her E skill. So just keep in mind of that, and who cares about their elemental normal attack damage, and make sure that it is considered normal attack damage when they deal it. And then on top of that, of course, things like the Hydro Resonance are going to be extremely valuable for your Candace teams, giving her that increased max HP. And then there's plenty of other Hydro characters that care about HP percentage, so you can really take advantage of this, and it's quite nice. The other ones aren't necessarily too crazy on her or anything. Something like the Electro Resonance is fine, but for the most part, nothing too crazy in terms of elemental resonances. And while this isn't specifically a team comp section, I'm not going to show you like a bunch of different team comps. There is one that I've been having an absolute blast in and hopefully inspire you to try out, as it's a ton of fun, and that is Candace, Kazuha, Rosaria, and Diona. This team is a really cool freeze team, as you can of course freeze characters with characters like Candace, Rosaria, and Diona. You get the freeze going. You can absorb the Hydro or Cryo with Kazuha, buffing the characters, grouping them all together. But the really cool part is when you're hot swapping between these characters, like you're often going to be doing, you're going to apply the Hydro with Candace when her Elemental Burst is active, and then you can swap to Kazuha or something while the Elemental Burst is active to apply that Hydro with his normal attacks. It's a ton of fun. There's a lot of cool utility with this team, and I really wanted to point it out because I've just been enjoying it a lot. All right, that's about it for today's video. It's a little complicated one, but I finally got it done, and Candace is here, and I've really enjoyed her character and her kit. It's pretty cool, and I think she has a lot of potential moving forward, and I'm really excited to see what characters she'll pair well with in particular in the future. I think it'll be a little bit of a wait, but I am excited for that, and potentially for whatever artifact set she might receive in 3.3 or something when we're due for new artifact sets. Really excited for all that and more, but let me know your thoughts on Candace in the comment section below, as well as how you're building your Candace. Did I point you in the right direction for your Candace? Were you going full HP and now you're like, okay, well, maybe I'll just build her for damage, because the difference is really not that high anyway. But hey, that's going to be it for me in this video. Hope you guys enjoyed and that it helped you out, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.